week for Father's Day, we focused on the song from our songbooks, The Faith of Our Fathers, which obviously wasn't talking about biological fathers. As we sing that song on Father's Day, it was obviously referring to those fathers in the faith, even going back a good number of years. And in that, we referenced, because the song references, those who had been through persecutions, who had suffered for the sake of Christ. And I did a very, very general, brief, really only referenced Hebrews chapter 11, verses 32 and following. And after the discussions we've been having on Job on Sunday nights, and how difficult it is sometimes to come to grips or to grasp exactly how it is that God works, or that sometimes he just doesn't work the way that we would expect him to, I thought it might be worthwhile to go back to this passage again this morning. So this morning I want to go back and look at the discussion again, pull some thoughts from Hebrews chapter 11 that we would, I think, consider helpful as we look at those who by faith endured. And this morning, very specifically, ignore what's up there. I want to focus on verses 32 through 37. Good morning. Well, it's good to be here this morning, isn't it? Take a look around. It's okay. You can just turn your head around, take a look around, especially those of you who are members here of this group. I hope you realize, first of all, about half of y'all are visitors. And that's important to note, because if you walked in and you sat down and you started thinking, oh, what's wrong? Everybody else is talking, but nobody's talking to me. It's because a lot of the visitors, it's almost like a reunion for them, that they come together every year and spend a week in crazy, grueling temperatures usually and other things, and then depart. And when they depart, they realize how much they love each other because of the time that they spent together in misery. So they come back and appreciate that. And if you are just kind of wondering, just please understand, we're not trying to be a cold church and not welcome you. It's just half the people don't even realize you're a visitor because they're visiting too. Therefore, if you have felt that way, I just want you to know we really appreciate the fact that you are here. And all of you who are here for camp, we really appreciate you're here too. We appreciate that you have come to be with us. I mean, there's other places that y'all could have gone this morning, but you chose to be here with us. That makes us feel pretty special. It really does. We're glad you're here. We hope that you will be encouraged by the time that you spend with us, because quite frankly, those of us who are part of this church here, we are incredibly encouraged that you are here with us. We really appreciate it. And I don't even know if I can adequately explain just how grateful we are. I think it is a very encouraging day for a lot of people as we are getting ready, for many of us, to begin this camp week. But I think it is important to maybe have a few reminders as well of the things that really ultimately truly matter. Now, when you turn to Hebrews chapter 11, you see in the first couple verses, we kind of have this idea of faith. Faith is the substance of that which is hoped for. It is conviction of the things that are not seen, for by it the men of old gained their approval. Now, this is going to sound kind of familiar to some of y'all who remember the class. It's been 2 years now, about 2 years since we went through Hebrews on Wednesday nights. But a little refresher probably isn't going to hurt. Hebrews is written to a group of Christians who were suffering some kind of persecution that is so bad that they began to think, is there a way that I can get out of it? How can I serve God on the one hand and please God while still avoiding the persecution? And they're Jewish Christians, so they thought, I think I know a loophole here, because we can just serve God under the old covenant. And apparently this is a persecution that did not involve the Jews, and so they would just simply say, I'm going to serve God under the parameters of the old covenant and that law, and therefore I can please God, because didn't that covenant come from God to begin with? Wasn't he the one that ordained it and gave it to them? Yeah, absolutely. And they say, well, we'll please God this way, and we won't get the persecution that comes from over here. And so the Hebrews author deals with this problem where these folks believe that the covenants are equal, that one is just as good as the other. God is pleased by either one. And the Hebrews author says that is not the case at all, because the new covenant is exponentially greater. The new covenant offers things that that old covenant never could do. The Hebrews writer stresses that people during the time of that old covenant, they never pleased God by following the laws of the old covenant. He says God has always been pleased by one fundamental thing: faith. It's not their adherence to the law. It's not how well they kept up with things. It's not their sacrifice. God has always been pleased by one thing: faith. And so we get to chapter 11, Hebrews chapter 11. The author focuses on a lot of folks who, from the old covenant, who pleased God. And even there, I think I have already misphrased this chapter, because Hebrews 11 is not about people. Hebrews 11 is not about the people. See, the Hebrews author focuses on a lot of times in which God was pleased with decisions. But it never had anything to do with breaking or obeying the law as it was. It was always because they did something specific by which they pleased God. And this is where I think we oftentimes get Hebrews chapter 11 wrong, because we often, as is done right here, phrase Hebrews chapter 11 in this terminology. This is the Hall of Fame of faith. How many of y'all have heard that before? Hebrews 11, and I don't just mean because I just said it, before you came here today. Anybody heard that phrase before? The Hall of Fame of faith. Yeah, a lot of us have. I've used it for I don't know how long, and yet here's the thing. Hebrews 11 is not a Hall of Fame. It's not a Hall of Fame of faith. This is not a who's who listing of people who are the pinnacles of faithfulness. It's not a listing of people that we're going to find in heaven. This is not a listing of people who are enshrined in a Hall of Fame. Hebrews chapter 11, and really only the first 31 verses of Hebrews chapter 11, it's a list of people who had enough faith to do the hard thing when there was an easier option. It's all about single actions that they do. By faith, Abel offered a better sacrifice. By faith, Enoch was taken up. By faith, Noah built an ark. By faith, Abraham left. Do you see the pattern? This isn't a list of people who lived faithful lives. This isn't a list of people who are faithful people. It doesn't say Abel lived faithfully to God all of his days, and Enoch lived faithfully to God all of his days, and Noah lived faithfully to God all of his days, etc. This is a list of people who performed great actions because they had the faith to perform that action in that moment. There's a difference. You see, Hall of Fames are about people. Hall of Fames are about careers. Hall of Fames are about doing things that everyone else is in awe of, because you know there's no way that I would ever be able to do what this person does. They're enshrined in a Hall of Fame because they are greater at what they do than anybody else, and there's no way that anybody else is going to match up to them. Hebrews 11 is the exact opposite of that. Hebrews 11 does not hold people up on a pedestal that says, hey, look at how great they are. Don't you wish you could be like them? Hebrews chapter 11 puts ordinary people in front of you that says, hey, if they can do it, you can do it too. It's the exact opposite of what we would consider to be a Hall of Fame. Hebrews 11 is about incredible action of faith that it's not about people who do it. And to drive this point home, once you get to verse 32 when the author says, you know, time would fail me if I keep talking about, from that point on, it's not even about the names. He doesn't even mention names past verse 32. All he does is he continues to talk about actions that were performed by faith. So with that in mind, let's get into our text this morning, where we pick up with the nameless actions of faith. In verse 32, here it is, the Hebrews author says, "What more shall I say? For time would fail me to talk of Gideon, Barak, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword. They were made strong out of weakness and became mighty in war, and they put foreign armies to flight, and women received back their dead by resurrection." These are the cool stories, aren't they? These are the stories that we like to tell. David against Goliath and the Philistines. Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. We like to read about Hezekiah who prayed to God and was made strong again. We're intrigued by the stories of David as he's escaping from Saul on the run because Saul wants to kill him. Or the same thing with Elijah, who is fleeing and getting away from Ahab and Jezebel. We like these stories because they all have something in common. These people were delivered. They were saved. And that's true, isn't it? The Bible is full of all kinds of examples of people who were saved. They're saved from death. They escaped the edge of the sword. They could have died. They could have gone through problems, this, that, or the other, but they didn't. Remember in Acts chapter 12, while Peter's in prison and Herod wants to execute him, what happens in the middle of the night? The angel comes. And he delivers him, brings him out of the cell and saves him. That's a really cool story. That is a faith-building story that we serve a God who not only is able to do that, but does it. We know these stories. We love these stories. There's such a boost to our faith. We know that whatever situation we find ourselves in, we serve a God who is bigger than that threat, right? In Acts 14, remember Paul, as he's there in Lystra on his first journey, what happened to him? He was stoned. He was executed by people hurling stones at him until he was dead. And what did he do at that point? He got up and he walked to the next town. How does that happen? He should have been dead. Either God didn't let him die, or if he did, this was a resurrection account right there. Either way, he was delivered from death. And it's this very deliverance that we love to focus on. I tell you, this is probably the most popular message today in Christianity at large, that God delivers. God saves. And I don't mean saves as in saves your soul from sin. I mean that God saves you in whatever situation that you're in. I could have gone and found all kinds of quotations from all kinds of people, as the case is. I chose this one from a guy named Joseph Prince. He's a proponent of what we might call the health and wealth gospel or the prosperity gospel. Here's a message, a snippet of something that he said: the Lord saves. More than just saving your soul, the Lord saves. He saves us from our addictions, from our bad habits. He saves us from sin, from getting into further trouble. He even saves lost situations. What area in your life needs saving right now? If you say you need help, the Lord will save, and he loves to save. Saving is what he does best. Now, he's a very popular proponent of, like I said, the health wealth gospel. And this sounds really good, doesn't it? I mean, to have someone let you know that this sounds really good. And for the vast majority of this, it's actually pretty biblical. I mean, most of the things that he says here are actually true. There's not much that you can say about this statement that is incorrect. God does heal. God does help people through their addictions, through their problems, through their troubles. God does work in our lives, and he does so in ways that we don't even see until we get on the other side of it and we look back and we say, wow, that was God, wasn't it? He helps us in so many ways, and I hope that we can derive the proper hope from that. The hope that the psalmists have as they write their laments. Typically writing their laments from an impossible situation that God gets them out of. And then they look back on it and they say, this is what the Lord has done for me. Clearly, throughout the Bible, we see all manner of stories that demonstrate this point. God intervenes. God saves from all kinds of troubles. But even so, Hebrews chapter 11 should give us pause when we listen to messages like Mr. Prince's message here, which, even though I think is true, can be rather problematic, because the implication is, the impression given by what he says is, the Lord will save you every time. No matter what your situation, no matter your scenario, no matter what you're going through, if you say you need help, God's just going to take it all away. The implication is that Jesus is sitting there just champing at the bit, waiting for that moment that you're finally going to cry out. He's just sitting there saying, come on, buddy. All you got to do is turn to me, say the magic word, say it, and I'm going to give you the easy button in life. I can pound it, and life is going to be great for you. But is that the picture that we find? Let's keep going. Verse 35, some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking, flogging, even chains and imprisonment. Were these people delivered? Did they escape? Tortured, mocked, flogged, or scourged. You know, the Hebrews author even points out they had a chance, they had a choice to avoid this persecution and suffering. They had the opportunity to be released. I think the implication is at any point in time they could have been released just simply by recanting and giving up their faith. But instead, what do? They hold firmly. They hold firmly to their confession of faith. And they pay dearly for it. There's no mention of escape here. There is no deliverance. There is no happy ending. Well, there is. But as far as where we are in the sermon right now, there is no happy ending for them. Folks, this isn't the fun part. We don't often say, by faith we get to be persecuted. We don't focus on how we can be tortured for our faith, how we can please God by being physically punished. Even the story of deliverance that we talked about earlier from Acts chapter 14 and verse 19, when Paul was taken outside of the city, was he delivered? Yeah. But not before what? His deliverance didn't come before he was stoned to the point of death. Let that sink in. Was God planning to deliver Paul? Yeah, absolutely. But Paul's deliverance was not a deliverance from going through the pain and the suffering and the trouble. If anything, it's Paul's service to God that brought this on. And don't think for a second that God could not have stepped in and stopped it all from happening. He easily could have done that. He could have put some kind of magical force field around Paul that would keep him unharmed, like Rakshak and Benny in the fiery furnace. He could have kept them from getting hurt, but he doesn't. Paul experiences it. He goes through it, and he suffers. In fact, take a look at the suffering that Paul endures. Or listen, because it's kind of small print. You might not be able to read that. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 11, starting verse 23. Paul is having to defend himself in the final chapters of 2 Corinthians against those who are trying to claim he's not really an apostle for various reasons. And so he gets on the offensive here, and he says, are they servants of Christ? I'm a better one, and I'm talking like a madman, but with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, countless beatings, often near death. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews 40 lashes, less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea on frequent journeys, in dangers from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure, and apart from other things, there's also the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is made to fall, and I am not indignant? Now, we're not going to go through all of the context of everything that's going on that causes Paul to do this, but he is making it very clear he has sold out for Jesus the Christ. He is all in, and he is willing, not only willing, he has gone through all of these things. The others were calling it a weakness of his. And I firmly believe this is the thorn in the flesh that is talked about in chapter 12, because I think that is Paul's point, that the thorn in the flesh that he asked 3 times to be taken away was all of the persecution that he suffered everywhere that he went. And instead, God says, what? I'm not going to take it away. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is demonstrated in your weakness. This was Paul's weakness, contextually, chapters 11 and 12. This is what Paul calls his weakness. Yes, Jesus saves. But we can't allow some picture to form in our mind of Jesus that is incorrect. We can't allow a picture that's very popular, it's taught very often, that causes all kinds of disillusionment among those who profess Christ. Yes, Jesus saves, but that does not mean that Jesus saves every time. That does not mean that Jesus is going to save in a specific manner that we desire. That does not mean that God has to do our bidding in some kind of way, that as long as you pray for it and you use the right words, that he's under some kind of contractual obligation to do what you ask him to do. Because the Bible is full of situations in which God does not deliver in the ways that people desired to be delivered. When we start to assume and believe, as Mr. Prince said, that saving is what he does best, and if you follow that quotation further and keep on going, he goes, Jesus in saving is just like Michael Jordan in basketball or Tiger Woods in golf. It's just what they do. They're good at it. They're natural. They love to do it. They do it all the time. Well, sometimes saving as we think of it, as we imagine it, as we hope for it, sometimes that is not what he does. And no matter how much we pray and pray and pray, that thing that we've prayed for either does not come to fruition or it's not answered as we'd hoped. And we have to face that head on. And if we assumed that we have nothing to worry about, we assume, well, Jesus is a savior. It's what he does all the time. I'm going to take it to him. He's going to save. And he doesn't. We have set ourselves up for one of the greatest challenges to our faith we could ever experience. All because we are making assumptions that the Bible does not make. And we are hoping in promises that the Scriptures have not given. But even then, the Hebrews writer is still not finished. He goes on to say in verse 37, they were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. Let me read this again. By faith. All of this is by faith. The same way that by faith Noah built an ark, The same way that by faith the Israelites crossed the Red Sea on dry ground. The same way that by faith, he just said a few moments ago, some escaped the edge of the sword. By faith, they were stoned. By faith, they were sawn in two. By faith, they were put to death with the sword. Where's the deliverance? Where's the hope? Where's the Jesus saves in this verse? Because they were not delivered. They were not saved. And I know I talked about Paul being stoned and then being delivered. I don't think Paul's the one that the Hebrews author is talking about here when he wrote this. I think he's focusing on those stories of men of old from the Old Testament. But I do want to go back to another salvation story I referenced earlier in Acts chapter 12. Remember Peter being in prison? He was going to be executed the next day, right? And an angel came to him and he pulled him out, and then Peter went on his way. You remember that deliverance? Well, do you remember what happened right before that deliverance in the very first verses of Acts chapter 12? Do you remember why it was that Peter was thrown into prison in the first place? Acts chapter 12, verse 1, about that time, Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. He killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This is why Peter was in prison. Now, I'm going to be just totally transparent here. I have not listened to everything that Joseph Prince has had to say that's on YouTube, or Joel Osteen, Creflo Dollar, Kenneth Copeland, these individuals. I think I've heard enough to get a general feeling of what they teach. So I will be the first to admit I could be wrong about this. But I bet between all of those people that I mentioned, Acts chapter 12 and verse 2 has been expounded upon 0 to 5 times. I bet it is predominantly ignored because it's not a passage that brings that popular message. They may talk about the great deliverance of Peter in chapter 12, and they might briefly mention verse 2, but they won't dwell on it because it doesn't fit in their perceived narrative. Yes, Peter is delivered. It's an incredible story. But what he is delivered from is the exact same fate that James, the apostle of Jesus, receives. And James is not delivered from it. James dies. God does not step in to intervene. Could he have? He did so with Peter, didn't he? Could he not have also done so with James? But he doesn't. God allows that to happen. Jesus allows one of his inner three, one of the closest to him, the ones who were there at the raising of Jairus' daughter, the ones who were there on the Mount of Transfiguration, the ones who were with him at the very end in the garden when he was betrayed. One of them, he allows him to go to his death. He is not delivered from dying. He goes through the persecution. He goes through the suffering. He goes through the death. And that is exactly what the Hebrews author is saying. Again, by faith, these individuals went to their death, and neither their faith nor their love for God saved them from that death. And undoubtedly there were prayers. Those prayers were not answered as they had hoped. And folks, if we assume that God would never let bad things happen to us, that he's always going to step in and provide some kind of a hedge of protection, that he would always keep those who are his safe, that he's always going to save them from their troubles, and there's going to be all kinds of instances that are going to be ready to shake your faith. You know, just a few weeks ago, many of you probably are aware of a precious little girl, a child of a very faithful couple in Christ. She got sick, and within days, even though people around the world fervently praying for her, she died. even with the countless prayers being offered by many faithful Christians. You know, the first time that I preached this lesson in St. Louis, and you'll be able to figure out the date of exactly when I preached this lesson in St. Louis, I wrote this in my outline. Just this past week, a preacher from Texas was in an automobile accident. He died from those wounds. Couldn't this have been avoided? This is copy-pasted straight out of my outline. I had no idea at the time the connection that preacher would have with the church that I would be joining in just a few months. A church with many who still feel the pain acutely when Olin had his accident. And I know that there were fervent prayers from this group right here as he was in the hospital and maybe could have recovered. Prayers of deliverance that were not fulfilled. And his circumstance is just one of so many others. Now, I'm aware that I've kind of strayed somewhat away from the by faith. But as these people, they weren't necessarily in situations of by faith. But do you know who did have faith in these moments? The countless thousands praying for them. People who had faith that God would see it to correct the wrongs, to save these people, because that's what Jesus does, right? He saves people. But he didn't. At least not in the way that people were praying. And I think that there are a few takeaways for us. Main one being, and this should be pretty simple for us to see, sometimes God delivers as asked. Sometimes he does not. Sometimes prayers are answered, like when Peter left prison and he went to the house where he knew they would be what? Praying. Praying about him and his circumstances. But don't you think those same people were probably praying for James in the same way? You know, there was a man that I studied with in St. Louis, studied with him for a while, and the biggest hurdle, he just could not get over the fact that he'd been told for so long, these are the promises that God makes, that if you do this, do this, do this, do this, God is going to remove every obstacle, every problem. The more that you give, the more you're going to get back, everything else. And after years of all of that, it didn't work, and it failed. And I could never get him beyond that hurdle because he was mad at God because God did not fulfill his promises. Folks, sometimes God does step in. It's why we pray. It's why we go to him. But sometimes he doesn't. And the second point is very much tied to that. Our faith is not contingent upon the answers that we get. You know, I love Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and their story. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar asked them, I'm going to throw you in this fire, and what God could possibly save you? You remember their answer? They said, well, we know our God can save us. But even if he does not, even if he doesn't come through with this, that does not change who and what our God is. They didn't base everything about their faith on the fact that God would deliver them. They based everything about it on the fact that we know God is still God. Our faith is not contingent on bargains that we might make with God. Our hope is not in assuming that God is some great big vending machine in the sky that as long as we say the right words and press the right buttons, if we truly believe it, then he has to give us what we want. Our faith is based on who God is and what he has done through Christ, no matter what else he does. And our faith is in something greater than any of these small-scale deliverances. It's about perspective. There in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 35, that they might obtain a better resurrection. It says they're more than willing to go through whatever because they have a hope of a greater resurrection. If you're familiar with the song Enter In, I don't know how many of y'all might be, some of y'all probably are, and it's all about this idea of perspective, that from our side we're praying and praying and praying and praying for God to save this individual or that individual, when on the other side God is saying, well, you know what really is the best thing is for him to just enter in. It's a matter of perspective. In Hebrews chapter 5, starting verse 7, in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who's able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. And although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. It says Jesus cried out for deliverance, and he was heard. Well, that doesn't sound right, does it? Was he saved? No, he went to the cross, right? He died. How could we say that God delivered him? It's because the deliverance under question was not a deliverance from dying. The true deliverance was that he would not stay in death. This is what it's all about. Folks, my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, which is a really weird line, isn't it, when you think about it? I think it means frame of mind. I don't trust the sweetest frame of mind. In other words, I don't trust something just because it makes me feel good. It makes me feel happy. I get what I ask for. You know, that just because that's the case, that doesn't mean it's good, or the opposite. I don't trust my feelings and my emotions when I don't get what I want from God. And so then I pout or resent what it is that's happening. The song simply says, I don't trust my feelings and my emotions. Everything, the basis of who and what I am, I wholly lean on Jesus' name. So that when he will come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in him be found, dressed only in his righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne. Folks, on Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. Let's pray. Our great and amazing Father in heaven, you are indeed holy and righteous and awesome. We live to glorify you in all things, and we thank you because we know that you are who you are, and that no matter what answers we ever get, we can trust you. We can lean on you. We can take comfort in you. Thank you for being our God. Thank you for being our Father. Thank you for sending your Son. And it is through Jesus, our Savior, we pray. Amen.